Hey, this is former Blue Devil lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. My name's Joey Weaver. He's Mike McDaniel. Mike, team recaps. Roll on. Who we got?
Conor O'Neill, Deacons Illustrated. What's up, buddy?
I'm doing well. I thought we were coming on here to actually talk basketball, but that was my mistake. I forgot the gist of what you guys do, and the name. The name threw me off. I'm sitting here watching the basketball game though, as we record.
Good. There you go. In the spirit. You are far from the only person who gets very confused what this podcast is about sometimes. So no shame in that, Connor.
No shame in your game. We want to talk about Wake Forest because this was a little bit of a step back's an understatement because this was very uncharacteristic of Dave Clawson coach teams going 4-8, really never getting quarterback right. I guess we'll start there. What to make of all the quarterback shuffling, right? We came into the year on the preview, Connor. We talked with you. It was going to be Mitch Griffis as the starter. It was for a good bit of the year. Then there was Michael Kern. Then there was the one game, really, of Santino Marucci. Then it was basically quarterback shuffling the rest of the way.
We were making jokes the second half of the season that it was like they were like drawing straws in the locker room before the game to see who was going to start. Like there was no rhyme or reason, it seemed like.
So uncharacteristic.
Yeah, so some of that came because it was the Virginia Tech game. Right at, I think it was the sixth game of the year, and Mitch Griffis had a okay-ish start at Clemson. Like they lost that game 17-12. He only scored 12 points, but it's against Clemson. He did some good things to move the offense, and he came out and was really ineffective and looked gun-shy against Virginia Tech. They put a ton of pressure on him. He threw an early interception and got benched. And Michael Kern came in and moved the ball a little bit. I think I know they didn't score a touchdown with Kern in there. I think they kicked 2 field goals. I know the touchdown in that game came on a kickoff return. But the offense moved at least a little bit. It showed some life with Michael Kern. He got the ball out. And then he got hurt. Like he had a shoulder injury late in the game when it was kind of decided, and that took him out for like a month. So Dave Clawson wanted, like, that was the quarterback change. Like Michael Kern, if he doesn't get hurt, he's the starter coming out of that game. And so that's where the shuffle had to occur, and he was unavailable until the last few weeks of the season. Santino Marucci starts the next game against Pitt, and they win the game. He throws an interception in the last 2 minutes that lose probably about 9,999 games out of 10,000. And that happened to be the 10,000th game when Pitt did about 5 things in a minute span that are all designed to lose you a game. So, credit to Santino and Wake for winning that game. If not for that game, they're winless in the ACC. So, and then they went back to Mitch Griffis on the other end of a off week, I think it was. Or, no, their off week was earlier than that. They went back to Mitch Griffis, didn't play well at Florida State. And then really the most telling game of Wake's season was that first game, the Thursday night game against Duke, at Duke. That was Mitch Griffis' best game of the year. I think he was something like 16 for 19, maybe completed his first like 13 or 14 passes, was really effective. They had a lead. Duke was slow playing it because Duke was playing their third string quarterback. And Mitch Griffis still commits 2 fourth quarter turnovers. They give up 10 points off those I don't think it was 10 points directly off the turnovers, but 2 costly fourth quarter turnovers, and they lose the game still. So really, like, they played 3 more games. They were in the Syracuse game with if they win that Syracuse game, they're a 5-7 team that makes a bowl because they had a better APR, and Syracuse would have been 5-7. But it's just a matter of when you boil it down and say our quarterback's best game was still a game that he turned the ball over twice in the fourth quarter and we lost to a third-string quarterback, that's not a ringing endorsement in any way, shape, or form.
Is there anything that you would point to that got Wake Forest's quarterback room to this point? I guess that really the question here being that thinking back to for a number of years under this staff and this program, this has not been a problem. There hasn't really been I guess maybe at one point as a freshman, Sam Hartman maybe was replaced by Jamie Newman, but like,
yeah, that was quarterback uncertainty.
Yeah, this quarterback uncertainty has not been like a staple of this program at all, and in fact, quite the opposite. It's been a run of very good quarterbacks under Dave
Rock
Clawson.
solid.
Yeah, no, it was. You're never going to keep cycling great quarterback after great quarterback. Going from John Wolford to Sam Hartman / Jamie Newman in that 2-year window, and then Sam Hartman for 3 straight years. That string is going to end at some point. The shock factor was just that Mitch carried himself so well as a starting quarterback. He practiced really well. Like, we get to go to practices at Wake in fall camp. And in fall camp, if you had told me Mitch Griffiths was going to have the type of season that he had, I would have thought he played through injuries. I would have thought he lost all of his receivers around him. Like, it would have been so hard to believe because everything that we had seen to that point, he started a game the previous year. It was against VMI. It was an FCS team, but in his previous experience, like, he played well in spots. Even his first college game, he took Wake's backup offense down the field and scored a touchdown against Clemson in the 2020 season opener. So there were all these signs that pointed toward him being the next guy, the next one in line. They were confident in the fact that for the first time, really, it was a quarterback who had been in the system to learn behind quarterbacks. Like, they started John Wolford as a freshman. They started Sam Hartman as a freshman. Jamie Newman was kind of the exception to it. His first start came about 9 games into or 10 games into his redshirt sophomore season. But he was such a project that he was extremely inexperienced at the quarterback position. And then you turn the reins back over to Sam Hartman. So, like, the confidence factor was there with Mitch, and I think in a way that almost worked against Wake Forest. His timing, his clock was off because of how many times he had gone through a practice and not been hit. Like, that was a huge talking point throughout the year, was when the quarterback doesn't go live for so long and then you put him out there in live game situations, it's going to take him a little bit to adjust and speed his clock up. And they just never seem to be able to get the clock right. And it's not all on the quarterback. Like, Wake did not get good offensive line play this year. Their receiver play, I thought, was very disappointing. And if it wasn't for the quarterback play, then we'd be talking about the receiver room as the most disappointing part of this team based on how strong it had been in years past. So I about somewhere in there in October, I started saying this offense was just a systematic failure. Like, it was just one problem spot after another. It was never the same thing game to game. And it really, like, they were able to win the first 3 games with a lot of smoke and mirrors. Beating Vanderbilt is never going to be a feather in anybody's cap. They should have lost the Old Dominion game. They had to come back from down 3 scores or 2 scores, whatever that was. But really, offense kind of failed Wake Forest this year, and it's has a lot to do with quarterback. Like, we got a lot of quotes from Dave Clawson all year about how you have to get the quarterback position right, and until you get that right, you can't really concern yourself with anywhere else on the offense. But it was across the board a pretty bad season for Wake's offense.
No significant coaching staff changes. Seems like,
Nope.
Clawson, I think it's a pretty good indicator of what you just said, right? Where it's like, if you don't get quarterback right, like, it's going to be a tough go. I think not making any sort of staff changes after the worst year Clausen's had, right? He hasn't had a season worse than 4-8 since he got into Wake, has he? Or has he?
Yeah, the first two were 3-9, but that, it was his first 2 years. There was a lot of work that needed to be put into those teams.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so this is the worst season in like 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah.
Been to bowl games 7 straight years.
Been to bowl
games
games, yeah. So, feels good about the coaching staff, running it back with, who he's had. How is it looking in terms of like fan base viewing the year coming out of it 4-8? Are they just thinking, all right, this is a quarterback issue, get quarterback right? They're bringing in Hank Bachmeier for his 6th year of college football. That should be, we were talking about before we hit record, that should be an upgrade, right? Like the 4 years at Boise, he was pretty decent at Louisiana Tech last year, completed a career high, like 68% of his passes almost. Should be an upgrade there. Is it viewed in the fan base as really just like, okay, off year with the quarterback, if they get that right, they'll kind of be back to being like that 7-8 win range at minimum?
I think for the most part, you'll always find some people out there that, 4-8, they'll bring up Clausen's overall ACC record, which I don't know off the top of my head, but it's not good. They've only had one winning conference record in 10 years under him, but that was a trip to Charlotte to play for an ACC championship, and they've had a few 4-4s in there. The thing you've got to remember with offensive staff continuity is almost all of those guys have been at Wake now for 10 years. Like, if I go down the top of my head, like running back, O-line, and offensive coordinator / quarterbacks, those guys all came to Wake when Dave Clawson came to Wake. So you're basically banking on the fact that you have good coaches. They just had a down year, and that goes to the across the board part of it. Yeah, and to speak to the Wake fans are realistic. You're not talking about Florida State fans that want to fire everybody after one loss. You're not talking about that kind of reaction, the knee-jerk type reactions like that. It'll be interesting to see what happens if they fail to make a bowl next year. Like that's where you kind of go. You at the same time that you point out John Currie is not the AD that hired Dave Clawson to Wake Forest. You also point out that those two seem to have a great working relationship. I think if my math is correct or my memory is correct, I think Currie has already extended Clawson twice since he took the job in 2019. One of those extensions might have been like a last week of the Ron Wellman tenure going into John Currie's tenure. But he's given him at least one extension that was signed before Wake played the game at BC to clinch the berth in the ACC championship. So it's like Dave Clawson's going to be at Wake. I think Dave Clawson can survive another 4-8 year. It'll get interesting if it comes down to that, but there's a lot of development. I think last year kind of showed more than anything that Wake is going to have to remain a developmental program. Like you're going to have to still build guys through 4 and 5 year recruiting. And that's where the backbone of your team has to be. Navigating that in the current climate, I don't know if that works or not. That's kind of what we're going to find out.
I'm glad you bring up the fact that Dave's job is really pretty secure because you've come on here long enough with us. Our listeners who have been with us long enough know that these are the types of episodes we like to ask about job security. And I feel like at this point, asking about it with Dave Clawson would be insulting to you, Connor. It would be insulting to the listeners. Like he's not on any sort of hot seat. It's all fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, you might see him wind up on some of those clickbait lists going into next year, just because somebody will look down there and say, "All right, who had the worst year in the ACC?" And Wake had the worst year in the ACC last year, so somebody is bound to think that, oh, well, the team that had a bad season has definitely got a coach on the hot seat. Well, that's, I mean, I would not be, I don't know, I'd have a heart attack, but But I'm saying, like, I think he's pretty secure even if things don't go well next year.
Yep. One of the things you mentioned a little bit ago, Connor, as you were talking about the quarterbacks, was that if not for the quarterbacks, then clearly the wide receivers are the most disappointing group, at least on the offense, if not maybe on the entire team. One of the things that happened, and as the way that these things go with on-demand audio, is we recorded our season preview with you back in August, and it was less than a week later that we found out Donovan Green, the top leading receiver coming back to the team, he was going to miss the whole year with an ACL tear. In your mind and your perspective, was the loss of Donovan Green the main culprit of that room disappointing, or was it even bigger than that? Was there still potential without him that really wasn't met in your mind?
One quick correction: it wasn't an ACL tear. He had an ACL tear that cost him the season 2 years ago, but this one was, I don't even think we got the exact diagnosis, but it was like a 4 to 6 month recovery process, I think is what they said. And that left it open-ended in case he wanted to pursue the NFL. He'd be able to be working out right now and like going through Senior Bowl stuff, but he's coming back for a 6th season in college. But to speak to your actual question, I'm guilty of kind of downplaying the impact of his injury when it happened and when it was announced. I kind of took the line of saying it was good, if anything, that the timing was as early as it was in fall camp, because it gave Wake the almost full fall camp to work in the guys that you'd need to step up in his absence. Whereas, like, if you lose him the week of the opener, then you're that much more pressed to figure out who's going to be in that spot. Where it really hurt is the way I looked at Wake's receivers this year is you had Jamal Banks, was a proven commodity. He's a big guy, but Jamal is not running past anybody to get open. He is a jump ball guy that you're throwing the ball to, and he's turning 50-50 balls into 90-10 balls. And then you had two short, quick guys that weren't exactly the jump ball types with Taylor Morin and Keyshawn Williams, but you could get them open in space. They can run past people. They didn't have a guy to do both of those things. Like, A.T. Perry could do both of those things. Basically, Donovan was the guy to do both of those things last year also with A.T. And missing Donovan really, really hamstrung what Wake got out of their receivers. It's also kind of, I say funny. It's not funny because of the production and because this is a serious thing, but it is kind of ironic. Dating back to after the 2017 season, I've been writing and alluding to Wake has these really good slot receivers, but they insist on only playing one at a time. Like, the 2017 season was Greg Dortch and Tabari Hines, and Greg had a great first half of the year and then punctures a hole in his small intestine and misses the last 5 games, and Tabari Hines comes in and played great. And so going into spring ball, I was writing about how Greg Dortch and Tabari Hines, you got both of these guys coming back. You got to figure out a way to get them both on the field to maximize their impact. And then Tabari Hines transferred a week before spring practice started. And I've just been kind of, it's like a dog chasing cars with me and writing about using both slot receivers at the same time. Like, they had Kendall Hinton and Ja'Quari Roberson, Taylor Morin and Ja'Quari Roberson. It's this repeating cycle. Well, they started Taylor Morin on the outside this year, and they started Keyshawn Williams in the slot, and they played a lot of snaps together. Now, Taylor was playing an outside receiver position, but it was basically having 2 slots on the field at the same time, and the offense was terrible. It was. I'm sure this was not anywhere close to entering Warren Ruggiero's mind, but it was like, hey, Connor, all the shit you've talked about us playing 2 slot receivers at the same time, you're an idiot. Stop doing that, because this is what it looks like. So I'm not on that train anymore. Like that's I've gotten off.
Killed the narrative. You've been pushing for 6 years, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm smart enough to take the evidence and take what I know and what I've seen and apply it and say, well, maybe you were wrong about this one. So yeah, I think they really need to develop some outside receiver and going into next year, like it's Donovan Green, and then man, you got to figure out if you got Walker Merrill, you got to figure out Horatio Fields. They lost Wesley Grimes. You got to figure out if you have a freshman coming in that can make an impact out there. They did get Taylor Morin back. He'll be good in the slot. They have another slot coming behind them. I'm not going to say that they should play both of them at the same time, but Deuce Alexander will be really good if the last few games are any indication. But yeah, they need to get more out of the receiver position. That's for sure.
How much of the issues that Wake Forest is having on offense, I guess just this past season, right? Because historically they've been pretty good. But how much of the blame can you put on the current state of college football, the transfer portal? Like this year it was really just quarterback, right? But like projecting forward, if we see another year where Wake Forest misses a bowl game and there are still issues at quarterback and there are issues in the receiving room, right? Where like outside of Green and Moore and like they don't get much and maybe Bachmeier is not as good as, we think he can be in the system. Like, is Wake Forest really going to turn into one of these feeder programs? I mean, you talked about how it's going to be like a 4 or 5 year developmental program. That's what they have to be, and I totally agree with that. But I think a lot of those 4 and 5 year developmental programs right now are being treated, at least in the current system, the way things are, they're kind of being treated as like the minor league farm system, feeder system type deal, unfortunately, with how the state of college football is right now.
Yeah, and that's where like Wake was late to the game in NIL and collective development. They had a couple failed on the runway type NIL starts, and so they've finally kind of gotten off the ground. They're real collective with the backing of all these major donors at Wake is finally seemingly putting together enough money to keep players. And that's where I go to. Like, the feeder programs don't have to be feeder programs if they can get enough money to keep players, and they don't have to match or exceed the offers that they're getting from the big boy schools. They just have to get it to a point where it's not worth them leaving to go make X number of dollars. And so I think I think it's overstated, the feeder program. You're either have or a have not in college football. Like, I maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm dumb. But
no, I mean, it could. I think there's a good chance of swaying like too far the other direction, where it's like kind of too extreme, where it's like you're either a blue blood or you're just getting your players plucked from you. Like, I don't think it needs to be that. It might not be that extreme, right?
You're the Wake Forest, you're Ole Miss.
Yeah.
Right. Sure.
Hopefully you brought that up because they play Ole Miss this year.
Oh.
In Winston. Yeah, they have a home and home that was probably scheduled 10 years ago, before, like, probably when Lane Kiffin was at USC. But yeah, home and home starts in Winston with Ole Miss this year. But yeah, I guess I'm holding out hope against hope that the feeder programs can still have seasons where they break through, and then follow up those seasons with an off season where they don't lose everybody because all the eyes have been on them and the secret's out about how many good players they have, and they're all getting plucked by everybody else. But I think as long as Wake has the admissions and academic requirements that they do, and the smallest alumni base, like they are the smallest power conference team or school, like it's going to be hard to compete on a regular basis with those types of teams. But it doesn't mean you're never going to compete on that level.
And we've talked about that quite a bit on this podcast about how, especially I think with the transfer portal in particular, the ACC has a number of schools that do not benefit from this in terms of it is a lot easier to transfer out than it is to transfer in. And it's one of those things that slowly over time is going to have a negative effect on Wake Forest among plenty of other programs. My alma mater, Georgia Tech, kind of the same way. Like,
Yeah.
dealing with that issue, and it's going to, I think, sap some of these programs over the long term. And it's, maybe some of these schools clearly are like, I remember the stories about Colorado when Dion got there this fall. They don't take transfers. Well, all of a sudden it's like, well, no, we're gonna loosen our transfer requirements just to try to help boost the football program. So at that point, you're making decisions as an institution of how much you value sports and what you are willing to do to help boost up your football program, as opposed to restrict it and kind of there's a word I'm looking for here, but basically kind of like safeguard it or clutch your pearls maybe to some degree, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and the one thing you have to kind of remind yourself, it applies to Georgia Tech a little bit, and it applies to Wake Forest a lot. The admissions requirements always get easier for the next coach. It's for the coach who's there, it's always it becomes an uphill fight. It becomes a tooth and nail fight. It's really hard for a coach who, and it runs counterintuitive to everything you would think, but that side of it gets a lot easier when you bring in a new coach and there's new energy and there's new life and there's a new guy saying, hey, I just came from, I'll pull a school out of the top of my hat, I just came from Texas A&M, and this is what we have to do to get better at football and win football games on the level that you want to win football games. That guy is going to be able to be more convincing for whatever reason and more persuasive than a guy who's been at the school for 10 to 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, personally,
it's just always the way it works.
Personally saw that under Paul Johnson, where, mid 2010s, he's, trying to do something, and all of a sudden it's like, well, no, like, we had these restrictions when you were winning games back in 2008, 2009. Why can't you win now? It's like, It's one of those things, like you're saying, and you're kind of a little bit damned by early success or whatever. It's like, no, you did just fine without this. But new guys, yeah, you're correct. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, Connor, and just before we start talking a little bit about next season, it's become a little bit of a theme, I think, in recent years with Wake. Defensively, it has not been a particular strong suit. Is there any sort of expectation there that you have or had in mind that they didn't meet this year, or is this just kind of what Wake's defense is at this stage, maybe under Dave Clawson or otherwise?
No, I think the final numbers don't do Wake's defense justice because they played at a pretty high level for most of the year. They just wore down at the end of the season. When they were competitive, when they were losing like 30-13 at Virginia Tech, felt like a bad loss at the time. It didn't when Virginia Tech kept reeling off ACC wins and was in contention to make it to Charlotte until the last week or two of the season.
I appreciate you saying that, Connor. I appreciate that. Throwing that in there for me.
They found their Jamie Newman is the way I would put it. Like Kyron Drones is the dude. But no, like they held Clemson to 17 points. The defense played really well against Georgia Tech. I think there was a pick 6 in there and 5 turnovers, I believe it was, a bunch of short fields, one on special teams. Like part of what we wrote before the season got completely off the rails was the most bitter pill to swallow about Wake's season was if you took this year's defensive performance and put it with any of the previous 5 or 6 years and the offensive production, you've got a team that wins 10 games and is either in Charlotte or just missed going to Charlotte. And they did that one year with a pretty shoddy defense. It was inconsistent in 2021, and that was kind of the best thing you could say about Wake's defense over that 7-year stretch. But they got really good defensive play this year. Like I said, they just wore down at the end of the year and put up some numbers that hurt the averages. But I think if they can repeat that and offensive improvements come with different play at quarterback, I think they'll be fine.
Well, looking ahead to 2024, we've referenced Bachmeier coming in, Griffiths out, Santino Marucci, unfortunately for Joey and I, because we can't make as many jokes, he's out. So is it Bachmeier's job, or is he going to have to fight for it a little bit?
No, it's going to be a legitimate open competition. And, maybe Dave Clawson's honesty about that at the end of the season cost him chances at other quarterbacks, but he's pretty honest and open about making it an open competition. Like, he wanted to see if Michael Kern chose to come back, would Michael Kern win a starting job? This is going to be his 6th year at Wake Forest, and I've said nobody likes Wake Forest more than Michael Kern. No student there, no professor there, no coach there. Nobody loves Wake Forest more than that kid, because he was backing up Sam Hartman when Sam Hartman was backing up Jamie Newman in 2019. Like, that's how long Michael Kern has been at Wake Forest. If he didn't like Wake Forest, he would have transferred out of there a long time ago to find somewhere to start. So he'll get a shot to earn the job. And then they're bringing in a freshman from Georgia named Jeremy Hecklinski, who was either the Georgia Player of the Year or one of the Georgia Players of the Year. I always got a kick out of seeing him either included on a list with Dylan Raiola in that state, and I think there were a couple other like 5-star. Everybody knows this kid's name and knows he's going to be a star at the high school quarterback level in Georgia, and he'd either be like the 3rd quarterback and included on the first team, or he'd be on the first team and they'd be on the second team. Like, he had a great season at the high for a team that played in the highest classification in Georgia. I don't put too much stock into high school numbers, because high school numbers are high school numbers. There's no bigger jump going from high school football to college football. But he did play in the highest classification of Georgia public schools, and I think he had about 50 touchdowns and maybe like 4 interceptions or 6 interceptions. It was something ridiculous.
Better than Santino Marucci.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I saw Santino throw 50 touchdowns in Wake practices, but no, like, we're very much looking at the possibility of, John Wolford, freshman starter, Sam Hartman, freshman starter, all the way down the line to Jeremy Hecklinski could win this job. Granted, he's got to take college snap. Like, it's kind of silly to say this about a freshman who's going to be – he's a year older than most freshmen. He'll be 20 when their season starts. But he's going to be in a competition with 2 guys who are going into their 6th year on college football rosters. Then they've got a holdover. Charlie Gilliam is kind of the dark horse in the race. He was on the team last year and redshirted and didn't take a snap. So I think he would get at least kind of a fair shot at the job in spring and fall camp. Like, it's kind of a weird transition back to, like, I covered 2018 and 2019 were both quarterback battles between Hartman and Newman, and I always thought it was weird that, like, Dave Clawson transitioned out of having quarterbacks battle, because he even had John Wolford and Kendall Hinton going up against each other for 3 years to be the starter going into those years. So going to 3 years of Sam Hartman as our guy to last year Mitch Griffiths was the guy, I thought it was a little out of character for Dave to just give Mitch the job. And now I think this is kind of Dave going back to what he knows and placing some value on competition at that position. And that's what he wants to see shake out over the next, what is it going to be, 7.5 months about.
I look at the schedule for next year, Connor, and I see the road trip to Stanford that Wake is going to take.
I'm not going there.
You sure? You don't want to go Palo Alto?
Yeah, no, I'm only driving for for basketball and football. And yeah, my pay your own way procedure has become, if you can drive it, you can try to make it. If it requires a flight, then probably not, unless it's the like Final Four or hell, I even drove to Omaha last year, so that was about
I remember that.
Yeah, that was 17 or 18 hours. So if I can make that drive, then I can probably drive to a lot of places. But I'm not driving out to Palo Alto.
Okay, well, figured I'd ask. Figured I'd check.
I have to leave on fucking Monday.
Yeah.
Driving all week.
Yeah. No, as much as I'd love to miss all the midweek pressers and all the coach speak that comes in those things, no, I will not be taking a full week to drive out to California to cover a football game.
Do you expect any amount of excitement, anticipation from Wake fans, at least at the chance to do something new, do something different, or do you think that the attitude is more so just this is unnecessary, what's the point of this?
I mean, we'll see what happens when they get there. It's one of those where I think if you ask them now, it's more the latter. But I think if you ask them the week of the game, I think you might get some of the former. Okay, this is cool. We're playing a team that we haven't played for an ACC game before. There's bound to be a little bit of excitement with something new. I don't know if it'll stick, but it'll at least be fun to talk about. I can't imagine there are too many Wake fans that are going to make the trip, at least from North Carolina, out there. Wake being a diverse school and where they get their students, I'm sure there are some Wake graduates living out in California that are like, hey, look, it's a Wake Forest football game that we don't have to fly 3,000 miles across the country to see. So yeah, there will be a little bit of excitement there.
I wonder what the chances are that that's the most sparsely, I'm going to put this nicely, the most sparsely attended ACC game next season. Wake Forest and Stanford in Palo Alto.
Which one of those is supposed to be better next year, Stanford or Cal?
Probably Cal.
The fact that Joey and I even have to do season previews for Stanford and Cal and SMU for that matter. Yeah. I mean, SMU at least, they like to spend a little bit of money to play some football. So I'm a little bit excited about the SMU edition, but Cal and Stanford. You can certainly in Houston, yes. But the Cal and Stanford editions, Joey and I are just trying to wrap our head around that a little bit.
Yeah, I guess I'm just sitting here praying they're not 10 p.m. starts that I have to stay up until 1:30 in the morning to watch.
Hell yeah. The best kind of drug.
The post-game Zoom press conference at 2 a.m. Eastern or whatever.
It's going to hit different.
I'll be hitting publish within 15 minutes of the end of that game, and I'll be in bed.
Look out for old Les will take care of those quotes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Les has got it covered.
I that's fine. Can have him. Works for the school anyway.
Mike, that's all I got for Connor.
I guess my last question: what are expectations looking like, at least based on? I mean, we're sitting here in middle of January, right? We'll have the conversation in the preseason like we always do, but middle of January with how the roster is looking right this second. I mean, expectations. Have to be higher than 4-8, I would assume, heading into next year with the roster it's returning. Donovan Green coming back, Taylor Morin, assuming an upgrade in quarterback, defense being about the same.
Yeah. I think at this point your baseline is just make it back to a bowl game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know that you're talking about. It has to be a what are they called? Tier 1 or tier, I don't even know if you're talking about tiers for bowl games. Just make it back into the postseason. It's 65% of FBS makes the postseason. So, get back into that range, see how things shake out.
Connor, appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Always fun having you on, Connor. Really appreciate your time. You want to tell the people real quick where they can find your stuff?
Yeah, it's Deacons Illustrated. The website is wakeforest.rivals.com. Got a lot of good stuff there, and hope people come check us out for football and basketball stuff. and a little baseball.
Getting to that time of year.
We are.
Well, you got season previews cranked out. The preseason #1 team. Yeah, they're going to be good.
Go get it. WakeForest.rivals.com. For Conor O'Neill, Deacons Illustrated on the Rivals Network. Conor, always a pleasure. Really, really appreciate your time. We'll talk again soon. How's that work?
Thanks, boys. Sounds good.
Yes, sir. Mike, let's get out of here. You want to go recap some more teams?
Yes, sir.
All right. iTunes, Spotify, all those good places. Go hit that subscribe button. We're on anywhere you go find your podcasts. Send us an email, basketballconferencepodcast@gmail.com.
Nailed it.
Thank you. Find
Yes,
us on
sir.
YouTube, youtube.com/@the-ACC Football Podcast. Once again, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, hit the like button if you're watching this on YouTube. We really appreciate that. Mike, where else on the social medias?
Facebook.com/basketballconference. Check us out there. Instagram @BC Podcast ACC as well. You mentioned YouTube. Go check us out all those places.
And as usual, on Twitter, @FTRSJoey, @Mike McDaniel SI, @BC Podcast ACC, and @Conor O'Neill _DI. Go find him on Twitter as well. Mike, it's been fun. You want to come back, recap some more teams?
Let's do it.
All right. Until then, for Mr. Mike McDaniel, for Mr. Conor O'Neill, I am Joey Weaver. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will talk to you again very, very soon. Until then, go Deeks and go ACC.